Good afternoon, everybody. This is Matt Kinsman, Head of Content at Connectiv. Thanks again for joining us today for How to Engineer Digital Revenue Growth, 6 Steps You May Have Overlooked. Our speaker today is Gray Montgomery. Gray is a senior media executive with expertise in transformations of large B2C news and B2B information services companies, including Winsight. Gray has also served as the head of mobile at McClathy, and before that, Gannett, where he was the strategy advisor to the chairman and the CEO. With that, I'll turn it over to Gray.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to get the opportunity to share this stuff with you. As Matt said, if you have any questions along the way, obviously we'll have a Q&A at the end, but there's also a Q&A window to use as well if you have questions. So just a bit about me. Matt, I think, covered a lot of it. I'm actually just kind of completing my first foray in the B2B media world, having been at Winsight. That's the 2 years I spent there. I arrived there in 2015. Leaving in 2017 has been a really profound experience. I had the opportunity of getting to work with some really great people there, but also kind of I think gave me a little bit a broader view on sort of growth opportunities and gave me a lot of excitement about kind of what can be sort of some different futures for media, especially when you look at the integration of events and research products into the portfolio of a B2B media company. As Matt said, beyond that, I've hold roles mostly in B2C media, McClathy and Gannett, ranging on back to running my own family's newspaper and broadcast business. So it's important when a lot of times when I kind of talk to people about the digital growth story of any place that I've been, and I'm not in this presentation, I'm drawing off of all those past experiences. A lot of the questions kind of immediately go to traffic and sort of what do you do to supercharge traffic? And I just want to underline that that's important, but what's more important is that we're in the game of revenue. And so throughout this, I'm going to kind of come back to this point. Keep your eye on the ball here, and that is what are the steps you're taking to ultimately drive revenue? And it's ultimately a bunch of things around quantity times price. So we're going to cover 6 areas here. Know how you make money, work smart, not hard, how to best deploy your team's time. We're going to talk about culture some. Then we'll finally get to some of the techniques and tricks and so forth to help with your traffic. We'll talk about how to make more off of every page view, and then I want to close out with just sort of some trends that I'm seeing in the world. So the first one, know how you are making money. This is what we just reviewed. Revenues, ultimately quantity times price, and there's sort of some different formulas to that across whether it's advertising business, a paid content business, or some other stuff. But it's really important that with each of these that you take time to actually look at these and figure out what your own numbers are. So advertising, what is your reach? What is your engagement? What's your sell-through rate? What is your CPM? Ultimately, each of those are functions of something else. In the case of reach, it's ultimately a function of your audience market size and the penetration of that market. Paid content, again, you're looking at reach, probably some sort of perceived content value. Your yield off of that reach, the number of people who are ultimately getting a call to action, a paywall, whatever you want to call it, and the price. And finally, there's a whole host of other stuff that are sort of new revenue levers that are emerging that I encourage many of you to look at. A lot of them are in the area of kind of these custom content areas, brand studio areas, and so forth. We'll spend some time talking about that. My point in sort of this section is run your own numbers. Like literally take those equations that I just outlined and figure out where you are at against each of these. And first, ask yourself, does this seem low versus sort of what I know peers are doing, either in my own space or in other verticals. Ask yourself, do I have enough revenue levers? Relying on advertising alone, I would argue, is maybe not the best strategy for most publishers in this day and age. Then critically, run experiments. against each of those. If you can find a way to, drill down to the sort of lowest level driver of your revenue. So if you saw, some of those previous slides, I had, reach as a function of addressable audience times penetration of that audience. Try in some way run experiments against each of those to figure out, like, if I were to create a 1% increase in this variable, what's that do to my top line? Running that against each of those revenue variables ultimately helps you focus your strategy and gets you out of the place where, again, a lot of times when I talk to other publishers, I hear, what can I be doing to supercharge my traffic? In many instances, like, supercharging your traffic may not create as much of a revenue difference as actually addressing some of these other areas. So it's just important to know, what is the variable that's most important for you to tackle? And then also ask yourself which, even if you've identified the one that can create the biggest impact, that one may not be an easy one to tackle. There may be the next most impactful variable may be much easier for you to adjust, and therefore may be the one to choose. I state all this because throughout this, you'll get the picture that there is no single magic bullet to the future of digital for us. It's doing a lot of things. But if you're going to do a lot of things and there's like this massive laundry list of things you could do, focusing your time is critically important. So chasing after the wrong variable is the first mistake in a long series that can ultimately hurt your potential to grow revenue as much as you could otherwise. Area 2 on that theme, work smart, not hard. I'm going to reflect on this from a bit of a content perspective because that's where I've kind of applied this exercise in both of my last 2 career stops. But there are ways that you could apply this to other functions of your business. And so here's this fairly simple exercise that I've done in various career stops. That is, just get a total number of page views for all stories you produce in some sort of time period, let's say a month or 2. And then have those stories then categorized by topic, author, story form, and distribution mechanism. Go back and determine the expense that is probably or estimating what your expense would have been against producing each of those stories. Then determine what the revenue was ultimately against that. If you're working off of a CPM or revenue per thousand model, it's pretty simple. It's page views times that RPM. If you can factor in subscriptions triggered, do that. If you're on a sponsorship model, then you probably need to allocate your ad revenue in some way. Run the math, and then aggregate that by topic, by story form, day of week, publish time, author, distribution mechanism, all those things. And look for trends. Where are you, by story, where are you maximizing profit and where are you losing? What seems to have the most impact. You're going to be surprised, and every time I've done this, there's a surprising number of stories, there's a surprising amount of work that you're doing, that the decision to do that work is causing your company to lose money. That you're spending 4 hours to produce a story that's going to get like 40 page views, and so therefore it was a bad decision to even choose to do that. Again, in an age where we don't have the luxury of doing everything we want to do and making critical opportunity cost decisions with everything. So it becomes really this simple. Stop doing the things that are losing you money and start doing more of the things that make you money. This often has the impact of really focusing yourself, narrowing down, sort of what it is that ultimately you focus on as a publisher. But in the internet age, that makes you, sort of that focus, sort of is a much stronger strategy, more sustainable strategy for the future. I'm going to summarize here a little bit of sort of what I've found in other places where I've done this. There are some definite constants that transcend the times that I've done this. But first of all, the things that are kind of the high ROI content types are those that have staying power. So think of, your kind of major franchise annuals. If you're talking about, U.S. News and World Report says, like, for example, their guides to the best colleges. that's, a resource that, consumer audience is going to come back to always, and something that people look forward to. That's a massive hit for them. What is yours? Resource content. I mean, a great example from my Winsight experience was, we produced, because it's food media, we produced a lot of recipe work. So those recipe databases were gold for us, because they never, became old. People would always want to go back and find a recipe for a certain opportunity. Evergreen articles. We had one story I remember, from the beginning of my time, Winsight, is how to write the perfect mission statement. It was something that, was very SEO friendly. Again, timeless. And really, kind of any story that sort of went on this model of 7 steps to improve X today, were, things that people would find to be interesting and click-worthy in the moment from a newsletter, but also, had a long life to them that we could come back and relink to them and so forth. Generally, I found that live news is low margin because there is a shelf life to it. People can't keep coming back to this same story because it doesn't have as much value in day 30 as it did on day 1. But live news is important because it creates habit. So, when I'm making kind of cut versus preserve versus invest decisions around content, I'm a little more careful about some of the cut decisions around live news. You may find that certain kinds of live news don't make sense, but do try to find some sort of way to kind of account for the value of the habit that live news is creating. This process does create often the political opening to kill sacred cows, and again, wherever I've been, I've found that to be very important to know what it is that you should not be doing. It reveals often the importance of distribution choice. Should I be putting a lot of effort into email? Should I be putting a lot of effort into SEO? Should I be putting a lot of effort into social? And because the reality is from place to place, the value of each of those distribution strategies, throwing apps there too, varies. And so this helps you understand, how you should be apportioning your time. And just because something is failing as a distribution strategy or it doesn't appear to be doing well doesn't mean that may not be the right choice for investment. The fact that it shows up very low in some instance may indicate, wow, we really should be doing more. But pay attention to that. This process also reveals the importance of headline choice, doing A/B testing around headlines, and just the general ethos and the voice that you write with, and helps, I think, kind of get you to a point of figuring out, what is it that really resonates with your audience. I'm oftentimes surprised by how little voice actually does matter, how little topic actually matters. It matters, and you will, be able to make some choices off that. But I have found oftentimes that those other things, the distribution mechanism, kind of optimizing for that, headline choice, and kind of voice and ethos, end up kind of being actually much more important. Finally, I've found, and we'll talk more about this in the culture section, that that ultimately tackling culture and some of the levers for that become very important in how you ultimately tackle a big digital goal. So let's talk about culture. I grew up, my first job out of college was actually as a journalist in newspapers, and coming into that world, there is kind of always, there's been a long-standing culture of when you're a journalist, you come in and I have a certain number of stories I need to write every day, and I'm going to do those, and I'm going to be the best at them, and then that's that. What kind of gets lost in that is it's kind of the mentality that the rest of the organization has to have, and especially in a digital age, which is that of the entrepreneur. And so I encourage content teams wherever I've been to make that leap from being kind of a laborer to being an entrepreneur. And ultimately, the best of those journalists, those content employees, knows their audience and knows their content as well as anybody in the whole building. and can really, if they want to tackle it, or really want to own their own area, can be, sometimes, sort of the best source of like entrepreneurial ideas for how to move the total business, not even just, how to tell the story the best or how to even increase page views. Culture changes around digital when, and especially makes the shift from the labor mentality to the entrepreneur mentality when rewards shift. When we started, making, decisions around raises and promotions and bonuses and all that kind of stuff, more directly in line with digital performance, then things, do really shift in a profound way. And so I underline the importance of that one. And finally, it's sales is critical in this. Too often, I believe, sales teams are left to sort of figure out how to sort of, make something in the content world of business where it's important for content personnel to be a part of that with sales teams. Part of the mindset shift is also just understanding that being digital first is a lot more than just putting stories online. It's embracing completely different ways of making money. The content group's role is no longer about writing stories, about being a subject matter and expert, building an audience, engagement around that, and supporting whatever means necessary to monetize that engagement. In the end, the purpose of the section is that, shift your content team from being, doers, laborers to ultimately being entrepreneurs around their topics. Okay, traffic. What are, kind of some of those techniques to really build traffic? What is from my experience, various places work best? Again, the most important thing is your culture. Does everybody, throughout the organization, is digital truly, the first thing they have in mind? I mean, there's a ton of places they go into and they, say, oh yeah, we're digital first. But in truth, the process of putting together a publication, whether that be a magazine or a newspaper, is like a freight train running through the place. And it's hard to ultimately unwind, that impact. Furthermore, just sort of seeing your name and something tangible like print, your product there, those create these different kinds of incentives. And finally, when you treat when your staff sort of has it in their mind, that I don't own this business in any way, then they do feel some degree of disenfranchisement. So tackle the culture. Again, rewards such as pay, promotion, recognition matters. Two of my list here is the one we already covered it also, but it's tremendously important, so I'm going to say it again. Do the analysis on your content. Understand, what are the topics that, actually create high return on investment. What are the story forms that work? What are the distribution vehicles? Again, you will find that, those big franchise topics, things that, have ongoing life to them that are somewhat evergreen, are really powerful for you. Remove, any friction you can from further engagement. Part of, particularly I think at Winsight, we put investment into delivery of slideshows as a story form. And, one of the criticisms we got back is like, oh, well, you're taking a story and instead of it being, one page, you've made it now into 5 pages, and so therefore that story gets 5 page views anytime somebody goes through that. And so a criticism is like, well, that's your engineering page views. Well, during that time at Winsight, we also doubled our total time on site in those 2 years, from 2015 to 2017. Time on site doesn't lie. And so the lesson in this is that, ultimately, things like slideshows, if that's something that is ultimately keeping your audience on site, then you should do that. Other places, my role at McClathy is responsible for apps. We found that, just the nature of being on a mobile experience and being able to swipe was somewhat addictive. And yes, it did create page views through swiping from story to story to scan headlines. But it also, at the end of the day, that swiping experience also meant that people spent more time on site. It was for that reason that, for time, we actually developed a means where you could swipe, and a browser-based experience as well, because it had such a positive impact on both page views as well as time on site. This is also why the notion of removing friction from engagement is also why you see many people experimenting with infinite scroll, where you can you can see this like probably most notably on ESPN.com, where you can be reading a story, and as you scroll down, you get to the next story. You can also have the horizontal version of that, which is something like again infinite swipe, but also infinite slideshows. So at Winsight, we not only run slideshows, but when you get to the end of a slideshow, we have the capability of suggesting a next story or slideshow to read. And then finally, video and databases are both very powerful forms to increasing engagement around content, spending more time, again, on site. Another great engagement driver is again, franchise topics. So, pulling from past experiences I've had, think about lists in particular. I mean, people we know from print, some of the better franchise ideas are these big lists. The top 100 operators of this, the best, the 50 best future leaders, the 20, best future, businesses. Whatever those major lists are, that if you have them already in print, think a lot about their online potential. For us at Winsight, that was a really powerful means of driving a lot of traffic. If you don't have them, then be thinking about those opportunities. Those were consistently heavy drivers of both traffic as well as time on site. And once you have them, look for opportunities to re-promote them. Internal linking is so critical to the engagement experience. If you have a story on, thinking in terms of the restaurant industry, where it came from, if you have a story on a great new brand that just posted a great quarter, and they were one of those brands that was featured in your, future best brands, then re-promote that package and get people to click through to access that. Again, some of your best content is free. Think about any kind of resource content. Mentioned earlier, recipe databases are really powerful because that's something that people always need. Thinking in terms of the food world, lists of biggest operators, most popular new products that your SEO-friendly concepts. The example I used earlier was how to write a perfect mission statement, was a very powerful one for restaurant business. And internal linking is also free. The story's already been written. So, take advantage whenever possible. If you have, tools that do this for you in an automated fashion. If not, have sort of a checklist of, what are some of the stories that have been the most popular across various topics, and manually add internal linking for those stories. Some of your best content is also very inexpensive to produce, and I refer to aggregation for that. Look to other media, particularly from the consumer world, where you don't have really direct competition, and sort of promoting another entity's story for ideas. At Restaurant Business, we often look to things that were being written about in Eater or Business Insider or some other Huffington Post about the restaurant and food industry, and would then write our own spin on whatever that story was that was written and link back to those publishers. That creates, going to point 7, then the opportunity to get other people to link to you. And content partnerships with big sites are huge. Both, every stop I've had along the way, you get, we would have these days, even in a network as big as Connectiv or McClathy, where you have, 1 billion or so page views in a month, you could see within those individual days, spikes on certain days would come just because you got, a major relinking, from the news world, Drudge Report linked to you, that can make an impact even in a network as big as McClathy or Connect. So once you've, for example, Business Insider, if you've linked to, or linked to some of their work, look for opportunities to create a content partnership with them. You may find that they have interest in, especially those big digital native sites like Business Insider are expanding into a lot of verticals and are looking for our opportunities to be able to, do a major sort of consumer-facing list or whatever on X, and they'll need your help to be able to best deliver that. That Business Insider was specifically one that Restaurant Business partnered with. A/B test email subject lines and headlines. Editors unfortunately don't always know best. I certainly don't always know best. What matters is what resonates best with your audience. And so take the opportunity to try out different headline approaches before you ultimately send your newsletters to a mass audience. And then also choose the one that works best, and also really learn from that. Make certain that that isn't just learning that a digital production employee is getting, but that's shared regularly with your content staff, so they start to really understand what is it about particular headlines that make them successful more often than not. That may actually have something to say about what kind of content is going to be more successful, and ultimately what your audience wants. Again, lists of all kinds have been very popular no matter where I've been. The last one on this list, getting your audience's daily flow. In a lot of B2B media, I find that the most powerful vehicle to get in the daily flows, newsletters. Your audience has some degree of desk job time, which they're checking email, and email is like the most effective means to get in their flow. Social's effective, but less effective sometimes in consumer media. Consumer media, where I've found is social's exploded in the last few years and is definitely the thing that you need to spend time to be in their flow. And in that world also, from having been responsible for mobile, push notifications is another way to get in people's flow. Okay, page speed. This is not one I've heard as much in the B2B world. This was like a huge thing in the consumer media world. After Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, I had a lot of friends who were there, and that was the area they actually invested in first. Was just like they took a look at just literally the amount of stuff hanging off of their sites and what their page load was, and it was terrible. And this was, of course, some of what inspired programs like Google AMP. So the point here is that, especially in a mobile world, if people click on your page and it's taking 10 seconds to load up your page because you have so much ad tracking stuff and other just forms of scripts and unnecessary code in your site, take a look at that, because that's ultimately getting in the way of that engagement experience we want to deliver. I remember, the Washington Post, I think they, attributed something, remarkable, like 30% increase in total traffic from just having done that exercise. Gain intelligence from your audience whenever possible. A simple one you can do is by putting up a registration gate in certain instances. If you have a story that is going to be really, really super popular with people that they're going to need, it may be an opportunity for you all to, place a, hey, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Actually get them to register, provide detail such as, email, title, function, company. Images are huge. Especially saw this first when I was in my various mobile roles. When we would test, what stories performed the best from a mobile app homepage, it was always whichever ones had the best pictures. If they didn't have a picture, those were the ones that definitely performed the worst. That's also true in email and in general homepages, web homepages, and social. Be in the zeitgeist. Know what's really on your audience's mind. Obviously, that's going to, entail what's like big news in your industry you cover. But actually, a lot of things that happen in broad, just American cultural life also matter. And, the example I can think of is, the election last fall. Obviously, Donald Trump was the biggest story in the U.S. And that election, some people really hated him, some people really loved him. Love or hate him, either way, that was like something that, kind of the Donald Trump effect on X drove like a lot of traffic for us really across any of our sites for a variety of reasons. Have obsessions and don't let up on them until your metrics tell you to. And so what I mean by that is when you stumble upon, something that's like a major story and it, really captures your audience's attention, then keep thinking about, follow-up stories and twists on that story. At some point, the audience will fatigue, and you'll see it in your metrics. And then at that point, it's done and it's time to move on to the next thing. But until then, if you can kind of safely say, I'm going to get 50% more traffic on this story than probably any other sort of more routine thing that I'd be covering, then don't do the routine thing. Do this thing that people are really obsessed with at that moment. So in a way, manage your own industry zeitgeist. Personalization and hyper-targeting. We'll talk a little bit later on about customer data platforms. But, this is not a new thing, but we're increasingly entering the age of big data and understanding your audience. Your ability to leverage that and ultimately give the audience more content that they like is, of course, going to drive better engagement on your site. 18 and 20, Facebook versus LinkedIn and Twitter. I've had varying experiences with each of those in the various places that I've been. My word on that is that in the B2B world, it does seem that Facebook is increasingly becoming more powerful and gaining traction as it has in the B2C world. So that probably in almost every instance is going to be your most powerful social channel. Twitter and LinkedIn, really varies from place to place where I go. So test those and figure out, your own answers to those questions. All right, thing 5. So we've talked about how to maximize traffic. Now, here's a part that sometimes we forget, again, is like, what kind of money am I actually making on every one of those page views? Is that right? And so it's critically important, we are thinking about essentially what is your RPM, what is your revenue per thousand? And here's the first one on my list here is, really, do you have enough units? Are you optimizing your ad map, particularly in mobile? I give you 2 examples of that. One is that, early in sort of my consumer media roles in mobile, people really just kind of forgot about mobile, and there would be, in some instances, just like one ad per page. And it seemed crazy to me that, a story that would appear in a desktop browser would have 4 ads, and the mobile browser for some reason only had 1. So therefore, it shouldn't be a surprise that your revenue in mobile was way off from what it was in desktop. In fact, when there was like this cry about, people are migrating from desktop to mobile, what are we going to do? We make so much less money in mobile. And it's like, well, let's start by just having a comparable ad experience in mobile. Second example of this is that it was a strange one as well, was some early instances in mobile involved piling a lot of the ads up front, but then not having any down page. And so you could have like a story after the 10th paragraph would not have any ads. And so if the story ran 10 paragraphs, so it kind of had a well-balanced mobile ad map. If it ran 50 paragraphs 10 through 50, wouldn't have any ads. So anyway, take a look at your ad map and make certain that that's balanced appropriately. High value units. So the contrary of what I just said, the world we're headed into is probably away from, kind of a NASCAR label approach where you put a ton of ads all over your websites, and heading in the direction of fewer but more impactful ad units. So there are a number of, kind of some of the more interesting, kind of IAB rising star units that, are worth looking into. A lot's moving down the direction of basically this notion of the full screen interstitial. Whereas, if you come to a site for the first time, you will be hit with, either like a full screen unit that you look at for a second or two and then close, or a video unit. There are different, variations on this. USA Today's for a number of years, I think, had a particularly interesting one where sort of the screen drops down and you get a big video unit, and then after it plays for a certain number of seconds, it rolls back up and you can access content. Branded content, native advertising, whatever you want to call it, has been really powerful for many sites, and it's because it's not interruptive. People are actually going to click on it because it's a story that actually is something that they may have interest in. It's not an interruptive experience. I've heard of sites, getting, in the neighborhood of 25x the RPM value of branded content versus what they were doing with display. And then finally, video, there again, another major multiple RPM versus traditional display. Audience intelligence databases. We are headed into the world where highly refined targeting is coming. I increasingly hear less, from kind of the agency world, both B2B and B2C, about, just tell me your reach and tell me how many pages you get. It matters. I mean, those are table stakes. It's actually expected now that looks good. But tell me how I can move so-and-so. I mean, this is all about the big account-based marketing play, that, it's no longer about just spreading ads to as big of an audience as possible and hoping that 5 of those people actually buy something. It's now, I need to know that some sort of action was taken. I need attribution that, a purchase was made against this marketing spend that I put. And I really want to know that, these 10 people that I want to communicate with, that I want to get my message to, get it. So if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to start thinking seriously about what is your strategy around audience intelligence, knowing as much about your audience as possible, and developing the capability of delivering messaging to a very refined audience types. People who work for a certain company, people who work in a certain title level, people who work in a certain function, people who meet all 3 of those. Do you have that capability? If not, then start looking into how to acquire that. Funnel media engagement to other higher margin outcomes. Increasingly, as I'll sort of sum up in the end here, I do worry about the future, sort of a push advertising model. And so increasingly it is important that we are delivering using media to help others of our revenue vehicles. So, is that media engagement, is that page view, that opportunity? I mean, part of the way to monetize that page view is not just ads. And here's an example. First one on that list, I have subscriptions. If you have a research group, or you have the capacity of producing some kind of paid content, do you, do you use, sort of your media capability to deliver an abstract of a research report or of a database or something, and then, provide, basically a free version of that. At the end, say, if you want to learn more, purchase this for, $500 or whatever the amount is to report. Business Insider is a really good model for this. Skift is also another good one as well. Business Insider has its Business Insider Intelligence Unit. I mean, a lot of their stories at the bottom are basically, a nice summary that then reference you to paying for a report or signing up for a subscription to their service. Are you using your page views to drive registration to your events? If, again, because it's easy for me, I'll think about my world at Winsight, if you're doing a story on, we would have, for example, our category managers conference, Convenience Retail and University. We'd have a story on one of our convenience websites about a category management topic, and it's coming up on time to register for a Convenience Retail and University event. Use that as an opportunity to promote that. So are you using your media, your page views to ultimately drive event registration? And if you have a good enough audience intelligence database, so you know who that person is reading that story, and you know that person is the kind of person you'd want to have at that event, then maybe you could have a conditional trigger for a call to action to register for that event, because you know that that's the kind of person you need at that event. Lead generation for a client. The notion here is probably more in the custom area, or applications are probably more in the custom content area. One that comes to mind very readily is this, you work with clients, often a request is like, I want to get these 20 people in a room at one of your events. You make certain those 20 people show up. So can we put together then, in order to do that, can we put together custom content that will engage, those 20 people? We'll know that it's one of those 20 people because we have the audience intelligence database that tells us they're one of those 20 people, and we'll use that to ensure that they come to the event. It's an alternative to email. And finally, don't forget to sell email. This is like a real easy one. So much attention, though, is placed on selling ad positions online, on the site stuff. But sponsorships of email in various places I've been on a sort of an aggregate basis end up becoming a very meaningful part of the total digital revenue picture at places. So if you aren't doing that, please look at that. All right, future. There are a number of kind of trends that seem increasingly inevitable to me, and I just be thinking about these. And they are, it's the bundling of content and advertising, that you need to have content in order to sell advertising, is going away. They don't need, content and advertising increasingly don't need each other. The best way to reach an audience is often through a series, in our world, of probably custom marketing and custom content services. The best way to make money off of content in our world is increasingly going to be by providing paid content models. And that's happening because fundamentally push advertising is failing as a business model that serves the consumer, the user, very well. Media, therefore, begins to, in that world, exist as a means of gathering audience, gathering engagement, gathering intelligence on that audience, and then shooting that audience into sort of high-value, high-margin businesses, whether that be, your custom businesses, your events businesses, or your research businesses. And that's why, if you are currently underinvested in events, meetings, custom research, all those areas, now's the time to start really building on those, because increasingly those are going to be, and they already are, higher margin possibilities for you. It doesn't mean that media is a bad business. There's a whole lot of reasons why all kinds of brands themselves are going into the media business, developing their own media brands. Red Bull is one of the first that did that. It builds engagement, it builds community, and it builds an understanding of that audience. But it's a different purpose for media than what we enjoyed throughout a lot of the 20th century. Push advertising, continues to decline. At some point, sort of our need to get as many page views as possible is bad for everybody. It becomes fruitless. Again, I increasingly hear from agencies, tell me what your time on site is. Don't tell me about what your page views are anymore. And so start to, as you think about your incentive systems, talked about those rewards for your content employees and digital employees around digital outcomes, digital metrics. Maybe those rewards, maybe those incentives need to align increasingly to time on site, and maybe not page views. That depends upon where your market is at. pull products. So we're moving away from push into pull products. So push, the notion is advertising, the marketing message is ultimately interrupted and pushed upon the user. In pull marketing, the notion here is that the user is ultimately asking for, requesting said content. And obviously, the examples we provided of custom content is a very good example where we can actually provide content that a user would want. It's not interrupted, and it's what they actually requested, it's what they actually clicked on that serves the advertiser needs as well. So deliver content that is essential to the user that only you can deliver. That is another kind of pull product. So here, be thinking about what your strategy is around data services, operator intelligence products, and targeting capabilities. Be aware of the whole sort of need for account-based marketing, create kind of supplier-operator connections that create value, events, networking tools, product databases, and create also operator-to-operator connections to create value. Also here, events, share groups, benchmarking services are all examples of that. In the end, above all else, listen to what the people we formerly called our audience and clients need and figure out how to solve for that need. Whatever that is, it's going to be your new business. I hear a lot of times when I meet different media leaders, this kind of, just almost kind of hand-wringing about what am I, supposed to be doing? It just seems like everything about the media model is starting to fail. Well, first of all, I'm not sure that everything about the media model is starting to fail, but I think that you have to do two things. One, you have to rethink what is the purpose of media. Again, I believe we're headed into a world where it's increasingly that purpose is about gathering audience and then shooting into places where you can make money. But two, it's also about building just different services. Media magazines came up to exist to provide essential information in the most efficient form possible of that time to an audience to help that audience perform the best they could at their job. Today, it just so happens to be that there are databases and data services and other means of providing that same purpose, being the most efficient means possible to help an audience perform the best at their job. If you aren't currently in that business, then you're behind, technologically. And so I just encourage you to, sort of, if you aren't, be thinking outside the box to understand that, you may have to develop, very different means of solving, sort of your legacy mission. And obviously the ones of the moment are, kind of more so in the event space and in the research and data services space. I'm going to close with this. These two books are kind of two of my must-reads of the past couple of years. Seventh Sense by Joshua Cooper Ramo really is all about kind of how the networking age, how the age of networks is just changing the entire world. It isn't even really necessarily a media book, but a lot of implications to media and technology. And then The Inevitable by Kevin Kelly, who's the Wired editor-in-chief. Just a tremendous, sort of view of kind of what the world about 25 years from now looks like. Probably a lot more direct applications to media and technology. Encourage you to read those. A lot of kind of where I've kind of started to develop my worldview, and kind of how I try to operate in my various jobs today. Kind of comes from reflecting on those two books. So thank you so much, and I. Obviously, if you have any questions you don't want to ask online, there's my email, and I encourage you to reach out to me. I'd love the opportunity to help. This is an industry topics that I'm very passionate about. But I turn it back over to you all for questions.
Great. Thanks very much. That was absolutely jam-packed with great information. Folks, if you do have questions for Gray, you can submit them with the Q&A tab in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Just type your question in. We'll read it out loud to the audience, and Gray can answer. Great. While we're waiting for folks to enter their questions, I had a couple for you. You talked early on in the presentation about shifting editorial and your content folks from really a volume of content more to being assessed on performance metrics. Can you talk a little more specifically about that? How did you really introduce this to your content staff? What were some of the very specific metrics that were really being emphasized, and how do they really adapt to this?
Yeah, so no particular order. The metrics have varied by location. So that exercise I talked about in the beginning, where you go through and figure out, like, what are for the business the most impactful metrics for your business to make the revenue leaps it wants to make, help inform that. Common ones. That said, common ones, obviously have been about audience reach, page views, that sort of is fading, and then time on site. How it's been received, when I was at McClathy, I actually did this process. Kind of involved as much staff as I could in that. So to the degree you can actually kind of involve your staff in that process, it doesn't feel like it's kind of a top-down thing that's coming at them, and that sort of helps improve buy-in. I think everybody gets, though, right now that they see, and particularly in the consumer media world, just all the havoc that's happened, and so digital feels kind of scary, and so that obviously kind of coming in with some solutions helps. At the end of the day, I mean, I think when you try to tell people, like, what I'm asking of you here is to no longer be a punch card employee and be an entrepreneur and, like, kind of go beyond where you're at right now. I mean, most people, like, are really excited by that because you're sort of trusting in them that they're able to take on a higher level of responsibility than what they were before. Not everyone is great at that, and so in some instances, you need to, like, kind of help people and sort of see, sort of like kind of some tactics to take and various next steps. But look, it's not 100% in these kind of shifts to a digital first culture. There are some people that don't want that and don't ultimately make it, But by and large, I've had good experiences with that.
Okay, terrific. Folks, if you have any questions, you can submit it in the Q&A tab in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Gray, one thing that jumped out to me is that you had suggested reaching out to bigger sites for content partnerships, and I thought that was interesting because when we have Connectiv's Neil Awards, which honor the best in B2B editorial, we always have judges coming from consumer digital enterprises, and invariably we hear them saying, this is great content, we'd love to have some of this on our sites. Do you have any suggestions for how to make the approach to those types of sites, and also what to look for in agreements? How do B2B publishers either protect themselves, or what should they really specifically ask for to get the best deal that they can?
Yeah, so the where to look, I mean, it's I don't know, there's like science to that. I mean, it's sort of, some of the usual suspects that are sort of the big leaders and kind of consumer, but what to look for specifically, I mean, do they obviously have like a meaningful traction or investment in certain content areas? So obviously that's critical. I had, honestly not too much trouble in getting buy-in to these things. I mean, some of them kind of act like they're too busy, and that's probably not something you can totally overcome. But in the end of the day, yeah, they got like kind of the value proposition you just noted, which is like, wow, you guys are sitting on some like really niche, unusual stuff. That's really cool. Sometimes it may to help sort of take the lid off things. It helps to just sort of review, everything that you could do and sort of see if something strikes their fancy. Not had too many. I don't really have any horror stories on the legal side of it. I mean, obviously the big clear term is that you need to sort of work out is like literally what does that relink look like. So make certain that it's really high on their page, that the link to your story. And two, I'd really encourage, that you get, really kind of some form of true co-branding on the article page. So this is, a Business Insider special partnership or project with insert your brand, and actually have, your brand logo. The logo's, important.
Right. Okay, good. Folks, we are winding down here. If you have a question, please submit it now. Gray, you had talked about kind of bridging the gap between free content and paid content, particularly around research and offering an abstract of some proprietary research for free and then using that kind of as a teaser to offer some more paid content. Can you talk a little bit more about data journalism? It's something that a lot of publishers are trying to do more of. Do you have any best practices overall around data journalism, really creating valuable data journalism rather than just doing a kind of a data dump?
Yeah, well, so, first of all, I think it's kind of important to have like a, kind of a base level understanding, like, what are sort of just the basic kind of, free level, media level data interfaces we want to have, and then get that experience that takes the user from the free to the paid, really seamless. Literally if it's a table and it's, it's got some columns in the table that are opaqued out, that's like really cool. So it actually sort of shows what the user could get if they would click the subscribe button and you'd be taken directly into a flow. One of the gaps I kind of find is that, from these experiences is that journalists, if you're kind of from really a true journalism background, you're not necessarily, there aren't too many journalists that truly are like data phobes or don't want to do it. It's just that it's not really in their routine. And sometimes, their routine's like really busy, which is like 100% of journalists I know, there isn't like time, to sort of sit down and like, I got to learn this tool. Try to really, put some effort into like learning the tool. So like, when Winsight acquired Technomic, we put a lot of time into like making certain that every one of the legacy journalist people, had very good training on those tools. And then we were finding over time that like, wow, like just the little like some of our most popular stories came from a content producer just literally rooting around in one of those data products and sort of finding some cool stuff, and then sort of saying, here's this interesting trend we found in Technomic's consumer brand metrics. And so, not only did it drive a ton of page views, but then it drove a ton of calls and leads ultimately to Technomic to subscribe to consumer brand metrics. So the point of that is that, the best practice is just, get the training done well, make sure it's understood, and then set up some tests of, actually, translating data into journalism to see what works. My finding is a lot of times it works like really well, and then if you have an environment, a culture that really rewards digital success, everybody else is going to want to do what that other person did that results in the highest page view story of the day.
All right, terrific. Folks, we are out of time. This concludes the webinar. Gray, terrific job. To our attendees, if you have any additional questions for Gray, you can reach him at gray.montgomery@gmail.com, and I'll be sending an archive of this webinar shortly. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you all.